The cold air sliced through the narrow streets of the city, wrapping every corner in a heavy mist that clung to the skin like guilt. Emma Collins tightened her scarf and kept her head low as she navigated the bustling crowd, her steps hurried. Mechanical, she wasn't late for anything. She was just trying to outrun the heavy thoughts that had been clawing at her mind for weeks. Job stress, family pressure, the lingering ache of another failed relationship, it all swirled into a storm inside her chest. She needed a distraction, something, anything that would pull her out of her own head. At the entrance of the subway station, she almost tripped over him. A man slumped against the wall, hair messy, clothes torn, shivering violently. Emma's heart jumped. People passed him by like he was part of the pavement, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he clutched a worn-out book to his chest. Maybe it was the way his eyes flickered open, desperate yet proud, refusing to beg. Their gazes locked for a split second, and Emma felt an uncomfortable jolt inside her. Without thinking, she knelt beside him. "Hey," she said, voice gentle but firm. "Can you hear me?" The man blinked slowly, his breathing shallow, and tried to sit up. Emma reached into her bag, pulling out the sandwich she had packed for herself. "Here, eat this," she urged. His hands trembled as he took it, like even that small act of accepting help cost him something precious. For a moment, Emma almost expected him to throw it back at her, but he didn't. He simply nodded, a silent thank you etched into the lines of his gaunt face. The platform was alive with noise, train brakes screeching, commuters muttering, but it all faded around them. Emma watched him devour the sandwich with an odd combination of sadness and relief. This wasn't supposed to be her problem. She wasn't some kind of savior. Yet she found herself sitting beside him, ignoring the stares, grounding herself in this one irrational choice. "What's your name?" she asked softly. For a second he hesitated, like he was weighing the truth. "Ethan," he rasped finally. Emma smiled, even though something about the way he said it made her skin prickle. "I'm Emma." She shifted awkwardly, feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes. "Do you need help getting somewhere? A shelter, maybe?" Ethan shook his head, slowly. "No shelters," he muttered. "Too dangerous." His voice was low but articulate, not slurred or broken like she'd expected. Emma frowned. "Then what?" she pressed. Ethan leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. "I just need to disappear for a while," he whispered. The words hung between them like frost. Disappear. It sounded more like a confession than a request. Emma should have stood up, should have walked away, but something about the rawness in his voice kept her rooted. "I don't know what you're running from," she said carefully, "but you can't stay out here, you'll freeze." Ethan opened his eyes again, meeting hers with an intensity that made her throat tighten. "I've survived worse." Emma swallowed hard, unsure why his pain felt so personal. "Come with me," she blurted before she could second-guess herself. Ethan stared at her, suspicion flashing across his features. "Why?" he asked, as if genuinely baffled. Emma shrugged, feigning casualness. She didn't feel. "Because you look like you could use a break. And maybe I need one too." It was a flimsy excuse, but it was the only truth she had to offer. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then slowly, painfully, pushed himself up, using the wall for support. Emma looped his arm over her shoulders without asking permission, ignoring the curious glances from nearby commuters. Together they moved up the stairs, each step an act of stubborn determination. As they reached the street level, Ethan paused, breathing hard. "You're crazy, you know that?" he muttered, almost smiling. Emma laughed, a sharp, surprising sound. "Takes one to know one," she replied, tightening her grip. The cold wind whipped around them, but somehow she didn't feel it anymore. They made it to a small coffee shop Emma knew, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. It wasn't much, but it was warm and anonymous. Exactly what Ethan needed. She guided him to a corner booth and ordered 2 cups of coffee, extra cream, and sugar. Ethan huddled into the seat, eyes darting around like a hunted animal. Emma sat across from him, hands wrapped around the steaming mug, pretending she didn't notice. She wouldn't push. Not yet. Minutes stretched into an awkward silence. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You're not afraid?" Emma shrugged again. "Should I be?" His lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Depends on what you think I am." Emma leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I think you're someone who's been through hell. And I think hell changes people, but it doesn't always break them." For the first time, Ethan's guarded expression softened, a crack in the armor. A glimpse of someone else beneath the dirt and exhaustion. "Why are you really helping me?" he asked, voice low, almost bitter. Emma stared into her coffee, swirling the spoon absent-mindedly. "Because someone helped me once, when I didn't deserve it," she said, "and I never forgot." Ethan didn't respond. He just watched her, the flicker of suspicion giving way to something harder to define. Respect, maybe, or gratitude, or maybe just the tiniest, dangerous seed of hope. Emma didn't know yet. She only knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The coffee grew cold between them as the minutes ticked by, heavy with questions neither dared to ask aloud. Emma watched Ethan out of the corner of her eye, noting how he kept fidgeting with the freedom of his jacket. He was restless, coiled like a spring ready to snap, yet underneath that wariness there was something fragile, almost boyish. She had seen that look before, in children who had learned too early that trust could be a weapon. "You don't have to stay," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the thick silence. His voice was rough but controlled, the kind of control that came from years of needing it. Emma set her cup down gently, folding her hands on the table. "I'm not here out of pity," she said, keeping her tone even. "And I'm not here because I think you owe me anything." Ethan snorted, a humorless sound. "People always want something. Always." Emma tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe I'm just stubborn," she said with a small smile. "Maybe I don't like seeing good people rot on the sidewalks." Ethan stiffened at the word good, as if it burned him. "You don't know me," he muttered. "You don't know what I've done." Emma leaned back in her chair, unbothered. "Maybe not, but I know what you're doing now. You're surviving. That counts for something." A waitress dropped the check on the table with a forced smile, clearly anxious to clear them out. Emma slipped a few bills under the cup without hesitation. Ethan stared at her, baffled, as if small kindnesses confused him more than cruelty. "Look," she said, pushing her chair back. "I have a stupid idea. Feel free to say no." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity slipping through his mask of indifference. "Go on." Emma hesitated, feeling foolish even as the words formed. "There's a ceremony this weekend. Some big educational award thing. Family's making a huge deal about it. They expect me to show up with someone." Ethan blinked slowly, not quite following. "And you want me to—" She shrugged, forcing a laugh. "Pretend to be my boyfriend for a night. Just a clean shirt, some manners, no strings, no pressure." The absurdity of it made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Ethan stared at her like she had grown another head. "You're serious," he said after a long pause. "Dead serious," Emma replied. "You don't owe me anything. But if you want, I can get you cleaned up, dressed decently, feed you a real meal. Just be there for a night. That's all." She braced herself for his rejection, for the inevitable sting of realizing she had crossed a line. But Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't mock her. He just sat there, eyes dark and unreadable, weighing the impossible against the absurd. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What's the catch?" he asked. Emma shook her head. No catch, just honesty. You can leave any time you want. He exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the chipped tabletop. And after? He asked, voice low. What happens after? Emma shrugged, playing it cooler than she felt. After, you go back to whatever you need to do, no expectations. Ethan watched her for a long moment, something shifting in his gaze. Maybe it was hunger, hunger not for food, but for something harder to find, a chance, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Slowly he nodded. All right, he said, almost surprising himself, I'll do it. Relief flooded Emma's chest so fast it almost made her dizzy. She forced herself not to smile too widely. Okay, she said, trying to sound casual. First things first, let's get you cleaned up. Ethan rose unsteadily, and Emma caught his arm before he could stumble. His body was wiry under the layers of worn fabric, but she could feel the strength hidden there, not broken, just buried. They left the cafe under the weight of 100 unspoken questions. Emma hailed a cab, and they climbed in awkward silence. Ethan pressed himself against the door, as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. She wanted to reach out, to say something reassuring, but the moment felt too delicate to break. Instead, she gave the driver her address and stared out the window, pretending not to notice how Ethan watched the world, like a man seeing it for the first time in years. At her apartment, Emma hesitated at the door. She lived alone, had always been cautious about who she let into her space. But something about Ethan made her override every alarm bell. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was reckless, but for once she didn't care. It's not much, she said as she unlocked the door, but it's warm. Ethan stepped inside, glancing around like he was memorizing every detail in case he needed to run. The apartment was small, cluttered with books and mismatched furniture, but it radiated warmth. Ethan moved carefully, almost reverently, afraid to touch anything. Emma disappeared into the bathroom and came back with a towel, soap, and a set of old clothes she hoped would fit. Shower's down the hall. Take your time, she said, handing him the bundle. He hesitated, then nodded once, disappearing behind the door. Emma sat on the couch, nerves jangling. This was insane. Bringing a stranger home, trusting a man she met under a bridge. What was she thinking? Yet, deep down, she knew. This was the first decision in a long time that felt right. Water ran through the pipes, a quiet reminder that something was shifting, something real. Emma stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. This wasn't a rescue mission. This wasn't charity. This was the start of something she couldn't name yet. The door creaked open, and Emma looked up from her spot on the couch, heart thudding in her ears. Ethan stepped out of the bathroom, hair damp, wearing the borrowed clothes that hung a little loose on his lean frame. But it wasn't the change of outfit that stunned her, it was everything else. Clean, he looked different. The grime was gone, but underneath was a man carved by hardship and something deeper, something almost noble. He hesitated at the doorway, as if uncertain he was allowed to cross back into the room. Emma stood, smoothing her jeans nervously. "You clean up well," she said with an awkward laugh. Ethan gave a small, almost embarrassed shrug. "Thanks," he murmured, tugging at the sleeves. His voice, stripped of its earlier rasp, revealed a richness that surprised her, soft but deliberate. He could have been anyone, sitting there, an artist, a writer, a dreamer. She waved him toward the couch. "Sit down, relax." Ethan moved cautiously, like every piece of furniture might collapse under him. He perched at the edge of the seat, eyes scanning the room again. Emma caught the way his gaze lingered on the books, the small paintings on the wall. His eyes weren't blank the way lost men's often were. They were curious, hungry, for something more than food. "So," she said, trying to break the silence, "you have a favorite book?" Ethan's mouth twitched. "Depends," he said. "Ask me before or after life fell apart." Emma smiled, feeling a strange warmth settle in her chest. "Before," she said. "Before everything," he leaned back, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "The Count of Monte Cristo," he said finally. His voice held a note she couldn't quite identify, bitterness, maybe, or longing. Emma blinked, surprised. "Heavy choice." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "It's about betrayal, revenge, survival." His fingers absently traced a line along his knee. "And hope," Emma added quietly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second the world seemed to pause between them. "Maybe," he said, "if you make it to the end." They sat in silence, the television buzzing softly in the background, neither needing to fill the space with words. Emma realized she didn't feel afraid. She should have, logically, but something about Ethan's presence was calming, even in its sadness. "I'm not very good company," he said after a while, breaking the spell. Emma shook her head. "Maybe that's exactly what I need." Ethan raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "What, damaged goods to match your own?" There was no cruelty in his voice, only raw honesty. Emma leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Everyone's broken somehow," she said. "The trick is finding the pieces that fit together." Ethan smiled, a real small, almost shy smile. And it was like watching a crack of sunlight through storm clouds. She knew she was treading dangerous ground. Letting him in, even a little, was risky, but there was something about him that called to the lonelier parts of her soul. "You're strange," he said, voice warm with a hint of amusement. "Says the guy who agreed to fake a relationship with a complete stranger." Ethan chuckled low in his throat, the sound rich and unexpected. "Touché." Emma grinned. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she felt something uncoil inside her, like a thread, loosening from a knot too long ignored. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go get you some real clothes, something that doesn't look like it survived a war zone." Ethan tilted his head. "You don't have to do that." Emma shrugged. "I know. But if you're going to meet my family, we have to at least pretend you're not a drifter." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're something else, Emma Collins." She liked the way he said her name. Like it meant something. As the night deepened, Emma offered him the bed. "I'll take the couch," she said before he could argue. "Non-negotiable." Ethan didn't push it, he just nodded, an odd flicker of emotion crossing his face. Gratitude, maybe. Or shame. She wasn't sure which hurt more to witness. She handed him an extra blanket, brushing his hand briefly, electricity sparking from the accidental touch. In the dark, as Emma curled up on the too small couch, she listened to the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing nearby. It was oddly comforting. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the half-desperate decision to bring a stranger home. And yet, lying there, she didn't feel regret. She felt a strange, fragile hope blooming quietly in her chest. Across the small apartment, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't supposed to feel anything, not anymore. But here he was, in a stranger's home, smelling soap and books and fresh laundry, feeling something dangerous stir inside him. He closed his eyes, willing the sensation away. It wouldn't work. It never did. Part of him had already started to believe again, and that he knew was the real danger. Sleep came slowly, reluctantly. Dreams curled at the edges of their minds, dreams of lost homes, forgotten promises, and futures too fragile to name. Outside, the city breathed around them, indifferent to the small, improbable beginning taking place within its heart. In the Quiet darkness. Two broken people floated closer together, tethered by nothing but a thread of shared loneliness. And neither of them knew yet just how much they would come to need that thread. Morning light spilled through the windows, painting the room in soft gold. Emma woke slowly, the stiffness of the couch pulling her back to reality. For a moment she just lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone moving around. Her apartment. It was strange, comforting, and terrifying all at once. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and caught sight of Ethan in the kitchen, fumbling awkwardly with the coffee machine. He wore the same borrowed clothes from the night before, but somehow he looked different. Lighter, maybe. Less like a ghost and more like a man trying to find his way back. Emma watched him for a moment, a strange ache building behind her ribs. It was dangerous, this feeling. She barely knew him, yet it was there, undeniable. "You're not bad at pretending to be domestic," she teased, breaking the silence. Ethan chuckled, glancing over his shoulder. "I had to learn to survive bad coffee," he said. "It's practically a life skill." Emma laughed, surprised at how natural the banter felt between them. She crossed the room and accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. The chai spark that jumped between them wasn't imagination. It was real, pulsing, undeniable, and it terrified her more than anything else. They sat at the tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the city was waking up, cars honking, people shouting, the pulse of life beating steadily. Emma tapped her fingers against the mug, chewing on her bottom lip. "We should get moving," she said finally. "If we're going to make you look halfway respectable by Saturday, we've got work to do." Ethan smiled wryly. "Good luck with that." The mall was overwhelming, a sensory assault neither of them was prepared for. Ethan kept close to Emma, his posture wary, eyes scanning every exit. It didn't take a genius to realize he hated crowds. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded once, but tension radiated off him like heat. Emma decided not to push. Instead, she led him into a department store and started rifling through racks of clothes. They bickered lightly over choices. Ethan stubbornly refusing anything too fancy. Emma insisting on at least one decent button-down shirt. When he finally emerged from the fitting room, Emma felt her heart stop. He looked normal, not a drifter, not a stranger, just a man who could have walked out of any ordinary life. "You clean up dangerously well," she said, voice a little too breathless. Ethan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was always something guarded there, something that refused to soften completely. "Thanks," he said. Emma swallowed hard, feeling the world tilt slightly under her feet. They moved through the checkout line quickly, Emma insisting on paying, despite Ethan's obvious discomfort. "Consider it an investment," she joked. "I want a good fake boyfriend for my trouble." He laughed, but it was thin, hollow. As they left the store, Emma noticed something strange. A man standing by the exit, dressed in a dark coat, watching them too intently. His gaze flicked from Emma to Ethan, lingering just a second too long. Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. She grabbed Ethan's arm instinctively. "Let's go," she whispered. He tensed, but didn't question her. They slipped into the crowd, weaving between shoppers until the mall swallowed them whole. Emma didn't look back. She didn't have to. The prickle on her neck told her enough. Someone had been watching them. When they finally spilled out into the sunlight, Ethan turned to her, brows furrowed. "You saw him too?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, heart pounding. "Friend of yours?" she asked, trying to keep it light. Ethan's mouth tightened into a grim line. "Something like that," he muttered. He didn't offer more, and Emma didn't ask. Not yet. They walked in silence back toward the train station, the weight of unspoken questions pressing down harder with every step. Whatever Ethan was running from, it wasn't just poverty or bad luck. It was something darker, something that could still find him in a crowded mall. That night, back at the apartment, Emma sat on the floor, organizing the new clothes while Ethan stared blankly at the window. "You okay?" she asked after a while. Ethan nodded, but it was a lie so thin it hurt to hear. "I'm fine," he said. Emma didn't press. She just sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The silence between them was different now, thicker, charged. Emma wanted to reach out, to bridge the space between them, but fear held her back. She didn't want to scare him away, didn't want to lose whatever fragile thing they were building. So she stayed still, letting the silence say what neither of them could. "I'm here. You're not alone, not anymore." When Emma finally crawled into bed that night, she stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if Ethan would stay or vanish like smoke. All she knew was that somehow, against every logical reason, she had already let him in, and part of her was terrified that she wouldn't survive it if he left. Across the hall, Ethan lay awake, haunted by the ghost of a past that refused to let him go. He had sworn never to trust again, never to feel again. Yet here he was, thinking about a woman who had no reason to help him, no reason to care. And he knew deep in his bones that he was running out of time. Sooner or later his past would catch up with him. The only question was whether Emma would still be standing beside him when it did. The weekend came faster than Emma expected, bringing with it a mix of excitement and dread that twisted in her stomach like a living thing. She spent the morning preparing, fixing her hair, choosing a dress that was simple but flattering. Anything to convince her family she had her life together. Ethan, for his part, waited in the living room, sitting stiffly in the new clothes they'd bought. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, yet somehow perfect. Emma checked herself one last time in the mirror and then turned to him. "Ready?" she asked, her voice betraying none of her nerves. Ethan stood, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. "As ready as I'll ever be," he said with a wry smile. She laughed, the tension easing just a little. Together, they stepped out, into the bright afternoon, two conspirators bound by a fragile, silent agreement. The drive to her parents' house was long and winding, taking them into the more suburban parts of the city. Trees lined the streets, golden leaves swirling in the crisp air. Emma kept glancing at Ethan out of the corner of her eye, trying to gauge how he was feeling. He sat rigid, his hand clenched around the seatbelt. "You don't have to be so tense," she said softly. "They're just people." "People are the most dangerous kind," Ethan muttered under his breath, staring out the window. Emma frowned but didn't press. She knew enough by now to recognize when Ethan's walls were up. She would have to earn her way past them, one careful step at a time. Still, a small part of her wondered what exactly had he seen in his life to make him so wary of even the kindest strangers. When they pulled into the driveway, her heart lurched. Her family's house was large, polished, and every inch screamed stability. The kind of life Emma had been expected to chase and maintain. As they climbed the steps to the front door, Emma suddenly felt a wave of shame wash over her. What was she doing, bringing a stranger into this world, pretending he belonged, pretending she belonged? Before she could second-guess herself, the door flew open, and her mother appeared, arms wide for a hug. "Emma, finally!" she cried, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Then she turned to Ethan, giving him a critical once-over. "And you must be Ethan," she said. Ethan offered his hand, his voice calm and steady. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Collins." Emma's mother blinked, surprised at his politeness. Dinner was a minefield. Conversation buzzed around the table, her parents firing questions at Ethan under the thin guise of polite curiosity. "Where are you from? What do you do? How did you two meet?" Emma had coached him on the basics, but she held her breath as Ethan navigated each answer with effortless grace. He never lied exactly, but he danced around the truth with the skill of someone used to playing roles. Her father was harder to impress. He narrowed his eyes at Ethan, leaning back in his chair like a judge sizing up a defendant. "You don't look like someone who spends a lot of time in an office," he said bluntly. Ethan smiled coolly. "Not anymore," he replied. "I had to step away for personal reasons." Emma winced, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Her father didn't like vague answers. The evening wore on, the tension barely hidden beneath layers of forced politeness. Emma watched Ethan closely, noticing things she hadn't before. The way he always positioned himself with a clear view of the exits, the way he flinched every time a door slammed. These were not the habits of a normal man. They were the instincts of someone who had lived too long under threat. Later, as dessert was being served, Emma's younger brother, never one to let things slide, leaned across the table. "You look familiar," he said, squinting at Ethan. "Have we met before?" Ethan stiffened, the fork halfway to his mouth. "Don't think so," he said casually, but Emma caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. Panic. It was gone in a second, replaced by a charming smile. After dinner, Emma found Ethan standing alone in the backyard, staring up at the stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan didn't turn. "You ever feel like you're playing a part so well you forget who you were before?" he asked softly. Emma's chest tightened. "Yeah," she whispered, "all the time." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with understanding. "You're doing fine," she said finally, stepping closer. "You're helping me more than you know." Ethan turned to her, the mask slipping just enough for her to see the man underneath, lost, raw, and unbearably human. "I'm not sure I'm the hero you're hoping for," he said. Emma smiled sadly. "I'm not looking for a hero," she said, "just someone who won't leave." The ride home was quiet. Emma drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the seat between them. At a red light, Ethan spoke, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Thank you," he said. Emma glanced at him, heart pounding. "For what?" He stared out the window, eyes distant. "For seeing me, even when I don't deserve it." Emma didn't respond. She didn't have to. In that moment, she understood something deeper than words could explain. Ethan was running from more than poverty or a bad decision. He was running from himself, and for better or worse, she had chosen to run alongside him. The next morning, sunlight poured into the apartment, softening everything it touched. Emma woke to the smell of something warm and slightly burnt. Coffee, she realized, and probably toast on the verge of being inedible. She smiled despite herself and padded barefoot into the kitchen. There, she found Ethan struggling with the toaster, a look of intense concentration on his face. It was absurd and strangely beautiful. "You're a menace in the kitchen," she teased, crossing her arms and leaning against the doorframe. Ethan looked up sheepish. "Survival skills," he said with a shrug. "Not exactly gourmet." Emma laughed, the sound light and unguarded. It was easy with him, too easy. "Sit down," she said. "I'll show you how it's done before you set the place on fire." They ended up making scrambled eggs and coffee together, bumping shoulders in the small kitchen, laughing at each other's clumsiness. It felt normal, dangerously normal, like a scene from a life Emma had always wanted but never quite touched. She caught herself watching Ethan more than once, the way his hair fell into his eyes, the way he laughed with his whole body. She had to remind herself this wasn't real. As they sat down to eat, Ethan grew quieter, picking at his food. Emma noticed but said nothing at first. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "You know this can't last, right?" She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Ethan pushed his plate away, hands clenched into fists. "This Pretending. It's a fantasy. Eventually, the real world catches up. Emma's throat tightened. Maybe, she said, but not today. They ate in silence after that, the easy camaraderie replaced by something heavier. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was pulling. Away from her, retreating behind the walls he had barely started lowering. She wanted to reach across the table, grab his hand, and anchor him there. But fear rooted her in place. Fear that if she pushed too hard, he'd disappear for good. Later that afternoon, they decided to get some fresh air. Emma suggested the park, a quiet, open place where they could breathe without feeling the city pressing down on them. Ethan agreed, though she could see the hesitation flickering in his eyes. They walked side by side along winding paths, fallen leaves crunching under their feet. For a while, it felt almost normal again. They found an empty bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and sat down. Emma tucked her hands into her jacket pockets, stealing glances at Ethan. He looked lost in thought, his gaze distant. "You thinking about that guy at the mall?" she asked finally. Ethan flinched slightly, but didn't deny it. "He's a reminder," he said, "that no matter how far you run, your past has longer legs." Emma swallowed hard, the gravity of his words sinking deep. "You don't have to tell me," she said, "but, if you ever want to." Ethan turned to her, his eyes dark and full of something that twisted her heart. "What if you don't like what you hear?" he asked, voice raw. Emma reached out impulsively, her hand covering his. "That's not how this works," she whispered. "You don't scare me." He looked at her like he didn't believe it, like he couldn't afford to believe it, but he didn't pull his hand away. They sat like that for a long time, two broken people clinging to each other in the fragile bubble of the afternoon. Finally, Ethan squeezed her hand gently and let go, standing up. "Come on," he said, "before we freeze to death out here." The walk back to the apartment, Ethan was quiet, but it wasn't the cold, distant silence from before. It was thoughtful, almost tender. Emma felt it in the way he slowed his steps to match hers, the way his hand brushed against hers and didn't move away. It was terrifying, this slow erosion of their boundaries, but it was also inevitable. She could feel it in her bones. That night, they ended up curled on the couch watching an old movie, sharing a blanket and a bowl of popcorn. Halfway through, Emma felt herself start to doze, her head slipping against Ethan's shoulder. She should have moved, should have apologized, but she didn't. She stayed there, breathing in the clean, simple scent of him, feeling his steady heartbeat against her cheek. Ethan didn't move either. He sat perfectly still, as if afraid that any shift would break whatever delicate spell had settled over them. In the soft light of the TV, Emma caught a glimpse of something rare and precious. Peace. It radiated off him in waves, fragile and fleeting but real. She wanted to hold on to it forever, even though she knew better. As the credits rolled, Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "Sorry," she mumbled. Ethan smiled, shaking his head. "Don't be." She sat up slowly, reluctant to break the closeness between them. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the air charged with something unspoken. Then slowly, cautiously, Ethan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, but it sent shivers down Emma's spine. She didn't move, didn't speak, afraid to ruin the moment. Ethan's hand lingered for a second longer, then dropped to his lap. "Good night, Emma," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered back, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. That night, lying awake in the darkness, Emma realized something terrifying and wonderful. She was falling for him, slowly, inevitably, like a ship slipping beneath the waves. She didn't know if it was foolish or brave. She only knew she couldn't stop it. And deep down, a small, fearful voice whispered that someday soon she would have to face whatever truth Ethan was still hiding. And when that happened, nothing between them would ever be the same. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended normalcy, as if neither Emma nor Ethan dared to acknowledge the growing current between them. They moved around each other carefully, sharing meals, quiet moments, and occasional smiles that lingered too long. It was dangerous, this quiet happiness, because it made Emma forget, if only for a little while, that it was all built on sand. On Thursday afternoon, Emma stayed late at work, organizing lesson plans in the empty classroom. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and she found herself checking her phone more than once, wondering if Ethan was okay. The thought struck her as absurd. He was a grown man, but caring for him had become instinctive, as natural as breathing. She tried to shake it off, but it clung to her. When she finally stepped out into the evening chill, she saw a familiar figure leaning against the fence. Ethan, his jacket pulled tight, hands jammed into his pockets. Relief flooded through her. "Hey!" she called out. He looked up, smiling tiredly. "Thought I'd walk you home," he said. Emma smiled back, ignoring the way her heart stuttered. They fell into step together, the night closing in around them. They were halfway home when Emma noticed something. A black SUV parked across the street, engine idling, headlights off. It wasn't unusual for cars to linger, but something about it set her nerves on edge. Ethan noticed too. She saw his body stiffen, saw the way his hand brushed against her back in a protective gesture. "Let's take the long way," he murmured. No argument from her. They turned down a side street, Ethan keeping a watchful eye behind them. Emma wanted to ask what was going on, but bit her tongue. She trusted him, or at least she trusted the part of him that had stood by her these past days. They reached her, building without incident, but the sense of unease lingered, clinging to her skin like smoke. Inside, Emma locked the door and turned to him. "Ethan," she said carefully, "what aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, looking torn. Then he sat heavily on the couch, rubbing his face with both hands. "I didn't want you to get dragged into this," he said hoarsely. "Dragged into what?" she pressed, heart pounding. Ethan looked up at her, something broken flashing in his eyes. "I used to work for people," he said slowly. "Bad people. Thought I could fix things from the inside. Thought I could make a difference. I was wrong." Emma's mouth went dry. "You're saying they're after you?" Ethan nodded grimly. "Not because I stole anything, because I know too much, and because I walked away." The weight of his words slammed into her chest like a freight train. She sat down across from him, hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Ethan laughed bitterly. "Would you have invited me in if you knew?" She had no answer for that. Maybe she wouldn't have. Maybe she would have run like anyone else. But sitting here now, seeing the raw fear etched into his face, she realized something important. She didn't want to run. There was a long, heavy silence. Then Ethan stood and crossed the room to her. "Emma," he said, voice low and urgent, "I'll leave if you want. I won't bring this danger to your door, I swear." Emma shook her head before she could think better of it. "You're not leaving," she said. "Not unless you want to. We'll figure this out." Ethan looked stunned, as if the idea of someone choosing to stay was alien to him. A knock at the door shattered the fragile moment. Both of them jumped. Emma froze, heart hammering in her throat. Ethan moved silently to the peephole, his whole body tense. He turned back to her, his face pale. "It's no one I know," he whispered. "Stay quiet." Emma nodded, her blood turning to ice. The knock came again, louder this time, then silence. Minutes dragged by. Finally, after what felt like forever, they heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. Emma exhaled shakily, her legs giving out as she collapsed onto the couch. Ethan locked the door, bolted it, and turned to her. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "I should never have let this touch you." Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a threat, but a man crumbling under the weight of his past. "You didn't bring this," she said fiercely. "You didn't ask for any of this." Ethan sat beside her, head in his hands. Emma reached out and touched his shoulder, feeling him tremble beneath her fingertips. "We'll figure this out," she repeated, quieter this time. "Together." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he lifted his head and nodded. Together. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a choice, raw, terrifying, and real. And for Emma, it was enough. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Ethan had said. Her mind raced through scenarios, each darker than the last. Could she really help him? Was she in over her head? Logic screamed for her to walk away, but her heart refused. She couldn't abandon him, not after everything they'd shared, however fragile it still was. Ethan stayed awake too, sitting by the window, his silhouette sharp against the faint glow of the streetlights. Every so often Emma would glance at him, feeling the weight of his presence. He hadn't asked for her help. He hadn't begged her to stay. Yet here they were, tangled together by fate and terrible timing. And maybe, deep down, by something even stronger than either of them dared to name. Morning came grey and cold, and, with it, a sense of urgency. Ethan insisted on leaving. "I can't risk them following me here," he said. His voice was flat, determined. Emma packed him a small bag with trembling hands, each movement feeling like a goodbye she didn't want to say. He paused at the door, hand hovering over the knob. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. Emma grabbed his hand before he could leave. "Where will you go?" she asked, her throat tight. Ethan looked at her, and for a moment she saw pure vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "Just away." Emma tightened her grip. "You shouldn't be alone," she said fiercely. "Let me help." Ethan shook his head, sadness etching deep lines across his face. "This isn't your fight, Emma." "But it is," she said. "It became mine the second I decided to care." Ethan closed his eyes, visibly struggling. Finally, he sighed and leaned his forehead against hers for one brief, searing moment. "You're stubborn," he whispered. "Yeah," she whispered back. "Get used to it." With that, she pulled back, grabbed her jacket, and slung her bag over her shoulder. "Let's move." They didn't have a plan. They barely had a destination. But they had each other. And for now, that had to be enough. They slipped through the streets, blending with the morning rush, moving with practiced anonymity. Emma caught Ethan scanning every reflection, every corner, every face. He moved like a man who had lived with danger stitched into his bones. They ended up at a rundown diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Over greasy eggs and burnt coffee, Ethan finally opened up more. He told her about the corporation he had worked for, a seemingly legitimate charity that underneath laundered money for powerful, dangerous men. "I tried to blow the whistle," he said, voice hollow. "But they got to everyone, every ally I thought I had." Emma listened, heart sinking deeper with every word. "So, you disappeared," she murmured. Ethan nodded. "Best way to survive was to vanish. Let them think I was dead or broken." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out it's not so easy to disappear when they think you know where the bodies are buried." Emma shivered despite the heat blasting from the old radiator behind her. "And now they've found you again," she said. Ethan's face darkened. "Looks like it." Emma sat back, absorbing the enormity of it. This wasn't just about survival. It was about truth, about justice, and about whether Ethan could ever really outrun the storm following him. "What happens if they catch you?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. She saw it written all over his face. They stayed at the diner for hours, plotting next steps on scraps of napkins. Find a place to lay low. Gather evidence Ethan had hidden away. Documents, recordings, enough to expose everything, if they could survive long enough to use it. It was insane, reckless, and probably suicidal. But Emma felt more alive than she. Had in years, fear sharpened everything, the colors, the air, the way Ethan's eyes softened every time he looked at her. By late afternoon, they were back on the move. Ethan led her through alleyways and forgotten corners of the city, always glancing over his shoulder. Emma kept pace without complaint, trusting him blindly now. Somewhere along the way, he reached for her hand. She let him take it, intertwining their fingers without hesitation. It was a small gesture, but it anchored her in a world that felt like it was about to fall apart. They reached an abandoned building on the edge of the river, the kind of place teenagers used to dare each other to enter. "Here," Ethan said, "I stashed everything before I went underground." Emma hesitated at the threshold, the place reeking of mildew and old secrets. But Ethan squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. Together, they stepped into the shadows. Inside, Ethan led her to a broken-down locker wedged between rusted beams. He knelt, pried it open, and pulled out a small, battered metal box. Inside were flash drives, photographs, ledgers, proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Emma stared at the contents, feeling the weight of them press against her chest. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. This was dangerous. "We have enough to bury them," Ethan said quietly. "If we live long enough to get it into the right hands." Emma nodded, determination hardening inside her. "Then we make sure we do." Ethan looked at her, something like awe flickering across his face. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said. Emma smiled, but it was a fierce, fragile thing. "Neither are you." They packed everything carefully, preparing to leave. As they stepped back into the fading light, Emma felt it, a shift in the air, a ripple of wrongness. She turned just in time to see the black SUV pull up across the street, doors swinging open. Men poured out, dressed in black, moving with lethal intent. "Run!" Ethan hissed, grabbing her hand. "Now!" And they ran. They ran blindly, hearts pounding, shoes slipping on cracked concrete. Behind them, the heavy thud of boots echoed through the streets, closer with every step. Emma's lungs burned. Her legs screamed for rest, but fear drove her faster. Ethan kept a tight grip on her hand, pulling her through alleyways and broken fences. There was no time to think, only move, only survive. They ducked into a narrow passage between two abandoned warehouses. Ethan flattened them against the wall, his chest heaving. He peeked around the corner, then cursed under his breath. "They're splitting up," he said. "They're trying to box us in." Emma wiped sweat from her forehead, heart hammering against her ribs. "What do we do?" she gasped. Ethan's jaw tightened, his mind racing. "We split up," he said finally, voice like broken glass. Emma's eyes widened in panic. "No," she said immediately. "I'm not leaving you." Ethan cupped her face roughly, his touch both desperate and tender. "If they catch us together, they'll use you against me," he said. "I can't." His voice broke and he shook his head fiercely. "I won't let them hurt you." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she nodded. She trusted him. Even now, when every instinct screamed to stay together, she trusted him. "Where do we meet?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan hesitated, then kissed her forehead, his lips lingering. "The old train station," he whispered. "Midnight. No matter what happens, meet me there." Emma clung to his jacket for a moment longer, then forced herself to let go. Ethan slipped away into the shadows, vanishing like smoke. Emma wiped her tears roughly and turned the other way, weaving through the crumbling ruins. She moved fast, relying on instinct more than logic. She had to trust he would find his own way. She had to believe they could survive this, even if everything in her screamed that it was already too late. The city seemed to close in around her. Alleys that led to nowhere, doors that wouldn't open, windows that stared down blankly. She ducked into a battered stairwell, heart hammering, breath shallow. Down the street she heard a shout, then the unmistakable crack of gunfire. She pressed herself against the cold metal wall, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. Hours crawled by. Emma kept moving, careful, invisible, like Ethan had taught her. By the time night fell, she was shaking from exhaustion and fear. But she made it to the train station. The place was a skeleton of its former self. Empty tracks, broken benches, graffiti scrawled across the walls. She hid behind a pillar, eyes, scanning the darkness for any sign of Ethan. Minutes stretched into hours. Midnight came and went. Still no sign of him. Emma's hope withered slowly under the cold stars. She checked her phone. No messages. No calls. Nothing. The fear she had kept buried all day finally broke free, clawing at her chest. What if he had been caught? What if he was hurt? Or worse? She sank onto the cracked floor, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe she had been a fool to believe they could outrun whatever hunted him. Tears slid down her cheeks silently. She had risked everything for him without a second thought. But maybe love, whatever this was between them, wasn't enough against the weight of the real world. She must have drifted into a restless doze, because the next thing she felt was a gentle touch on her shoulder. She jolted awake, ready to fight, but it was Ethan, crouched in front of her, his face pale and bruised, but alive. Relief crashed over her so hard it nearly knocked her over. She threw her arms around him, clinging like a drowning woman. "I thought," she began, but her voice broke. Ethan pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." For a long time they just held each other, two broken souls trying to stitch themselves back together in the ruins of everything they had lost. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was real. Finally, Ethan pulled back, brushing her hair out of her face. "We have to keep moving," he said, voice hoarse. "They're not giving up." Emma nodded, wiping her tears away. "I'm with you," she said simply. And she meant it. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, she wasn't letting him face this alone. Not anymore. They left the train station behind, moving into the darkness together. No plan, no guarantees, only the fragile, stubborn hope that somehow they could carve out a future from the ashes of their pasts. And for the first time, Emma realized she wasn't just fighting for Ethan. She was fighting for herself, for the part of her that had stopped believing in miracles long ago. And maybe, just maybe this time, she would find one. They spent the next day in hiding, tucked away in an abandoned mechanic's garage Ethan knew from his old life. The space smelled of oil and rust, and the broken windows let in cold drafts, but it was safe for now. Emma sat on the concrete floor, arms wrapped around her knees, watching Ethan pace like a caged animal. Every noise outside made both of them flinch. "We can't keep doing this," Emma said finally, her voice raw. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her, exhausted. "I know." Silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. Emma wanted to scream, to demand answers from the universe that had thrown them into this nightmare. Instead, she reached for Ethan's hand, grounding herself in his presence. "There has to be another way," she whispered. As if summoned by her desperation, a soft knock came at the back door. Ethan's body snapped to attention, his hand moving automatically to the knife hidden under his jacket. Emma froze, heart hammering. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, his voice low and deadly. He moved toward the door, every muscle tense, every step silent. Emma watched, holding her breath, praying it wasn't another trap. A man's voice called out softly, "Ethan Carter, it's me, it's Marcus." Ethan stiffened, confusion flashing across his face. "Marcus," he muttered under his breath. Emma watched as he slowly unlocked the door. On the other side stood a tall man in a worn leather jacket, his face lined with worry. Marcus looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days, but there was something familiar in his eyes, trust, or at least the memory of it. "Ethan," Marcus said, gripping his shoulder, "I've been looking for you. You're in serious danger, man. They're closing in." Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I figured," he said grimly. Emma stood up slowly, wary. Marcus noticed her and gave a small nod. "You must be the reason he's still standing," he said kindly. Emma didn't smile. She didn't trust easily anymore. They sat down around a battered workbench, whispering hurriedly. Marcus explained that he had once worked inside the same corrupt system as Ethan. After Ethan disappeared, Marcus had gone underground too, gathering intel, waiting for the right moment. "We have one shot," Marcus said, sliding a battered flash drive across the table. "Get this to the right hands and we can take them down." Emma looked at the drive like it was a live grenade. "Who do we trust?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, then named a journalist, Sarah King, a reporter known for exposing corruption. "She's clean," he said. "If anyone can make this public without getting killed first, it's her." Ethan's eyes darkened with hope and doubt warring inside him. "How do we get to her?" Marcus outlined a plan. Rendezvous at a small motel on the edge of town. Safe meeting point, quick extraction, simple. Too simple, Emma thought. She glanced at Ethan, but he was already nodding. They needed this. They needed hope, no matter how thin. "We move tonight," Marcus said. "Pack light. Stay invisible." Emma forced herself to believe it could work. What choice did they have? As they prepared to leave, Emma caught Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't predatory, no, but it was sharp, assessing, like he was cataloguing her for later use. She shook off the unease. Paranoia was a survival tool now. Still, a small voice inside whispered, "Be careful. Not everyone who smiles is a friend." Night fell, wrapping the city in a heavy shroud. They moved quickly, using back streets and abandoned lots to stay hidden. Marcus led the way, confident, efficient. Emma stayed close to Ethan, every instinct on high alert. As they walked, Ethan squeezed her hand once, silently. It was a promise, a plea. "Don't lose faith now." She squeezed back, heart aching. They reached the motel just past midnight. It was a run-down place, flickering neon sign buzzing overhead. Marcus went inside first, booking 2 rooms under fake names. Emma and Ethan waited in the shadows, the cold seeping into their bones. When Marcus returned, he tossed them a key. "Room 206, he said. "Stay low, I'll come get you when it's time." The room was grimy, the bedspread stained and the walls peeling, but it offered shelter. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the battered door. Something felt wrong. Too easy. Too clean. Ethan paced, the same unease coiling in his muscles. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Neither do I," Emma whispered. But they had no other options, not anymore. They tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every creak, every thud outside made Emma jump. She watched Ethan standing at the window, silhouetted against the dirty glass, his posture tight and defensive. She knew he was thinking the same thing she was. This was a gamble, one they might not walk away from, but they were in it together now, for better or worse. Sometime just before dawn, Emma heard it, a soft, metallic click outside the door. She bolted upright, heart racing. Ethan heard it too. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pressing his back to the wall beside the door. Emma scrambled behind the bed. A key slid into the lock. The handle turned, and just before the door swung open, Ethan hissed, "Run!" The door burst open with a deafening crack and chaos exploded into the room. Men in black tactical gear stormed, inside shouting orders, weapons drawn. Emma didn't think, she just moved. She scrambled toward the window as Ethan grabbed the battered nightstand and slammed it into the nearest attacker, buying her a precious second. "Go!" he shouted, voice raw and commanding. Emma threw herself through the window, glass shattering around her like rain. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Pain radiated through her ribs, but she forced herself to move. Ethan was right behind her, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead, but alive. They sprinted into the alley, feet pounding against the pavement, hearts slamming in their chests. Bullets ricocheted off the walls around them. Emma ducked instinctively, adrenaline surging through her veins. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her into the maze of back streets. "Don't stop!" he barked. She didn't, she couldn't. Every step was survival, every breath a battle. The motel receded behind them, swallowed by the dark, and for a moment it felt like they might actually outrun death. They ducked into an abandoned laundromat, collapsing behind rows of rusted machines. Emma pressed her hand against her ribs, wincing. Ethan checked her over quickly, eyes sharp with fear. "You okay?" he rasped. She nodded shakily, "Just bruised." His relief was palpable, but it didn't last. His face darkened as he glanced back toward the way they'd come. They knew exactly where we were. Emma's stomach twisted. "Marcus," she said, the word tasting like betrayal. Ethan nodded grimly. "He sold us out." The truth settled like lead in her chest. They had trusted him, followed him, and he had led them straight into a trap. "We can't trust anyone," Emma whispered, the realization cutting deep. "No," Ethan agreed, his voice cold. "Except each other." They moved again before the sun fully rose, slipping through forgotten parts of the city where no one would think to look. Emma's body screamed for rest, but she pushed through, driven by fear and fury. They needed a new plan, fast, but options were running thin, and the walls were closing in. For the first time, Emma truly understood what it meant to be hunted. By midday, they found refuge in an old church, its doors hanging off the hinges, its pews covered in dust. It was a ghost of a sanctuary, but it was enough. Emma slumped onto a bench, burying her face in her hands. Ethan sat beside her, silent, the weight of their losses settling heavy between them. "I'm sorry," he said finally, voice rough. "I should have seen it coming." Emma lifted her head, meeting his tortured gaze. "This isn't your fault," she said fiercely. "You didn't make him a traitor." Ethan smiled bitterly. "Trust is a luxury people like us can't afford." Emma reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe," she whispered, "but we still have each other." The admission terrified her, but it was the only truth that mattered. They stayed there for hours, resting, planning, healing in small broken pieces. Ethan checked the contents of the battered metal box again. Miraculously, it was still intact. "We still have the evidence," he said. "It's not over." Emma nodded, fire igniting in her chest. "Then we find another way." Ethan smiled at her then, small, weary, but real, a light in the darkness. As evening fell, they slipped back into the streets, blending with the crowd. Emma changed her appearance slightly, hair tucked under a cap, different clothes scavenged from a donation bin. Ethan did the same. They looked like any other lost souls now. Invisible, forgettable, and that was their greatest weapon. Sometimes the only way to survive was to become part of the noise. They moved toward the river, where old warehouses lined the docks. Ethan had a contact there, someone he trusted, someone so far off the grid even the hunters might overlook. Him. It was a gamble, another roll of the dice, but it was all they had left. Emma kept her head down, heart pounding, every nerve stretched taut. She could feel the danger closing in again. As they approached the rendezvous point, Ethan slowed, pulling Emma into the shadows. Across the street stood Marcus, pacing nervously, flanked by two men Emma didn't recognize. It was confirmation of everything. Marcus had betrayed them, sold them out for God knows what, money, power, survival. Emma's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, to cry, to hurt him the way he had hurt them. Ethan's hand found hers again, squeezing gently. "Not now," he whispered. "Later." Emma nodded, biting down the flood of emotions threatening to break free. They couldn't afford revenge right now. They needed to stay alive. Together, they melted back into the darkness, leaving Marcus behind. One day, the truth would come out. One day, he would answer for what he'd done. For now, survival was enough. And Emma knew with a fierce, burning certainty that she wasn't just fighting for Ethan anymore. She was fighting for the life they still had a chance to build. The city looked different now, colder, sharper. Every corner seemed to whisper threats, every shadow stretched too long. Emma kept her head down as she and Ethan navigated the back alleys toward the riverfront. Their faces were hidden beneath hoodies and caps, their steps quick and deliberate. They were ghosts moving through a world that wanted them erased. Ethan led them to an old boathouse tucked between abandoned warehouses, its paint peeling, its dock half submerged. He knocked once, twice, 3 times in a specific rhythm. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, and a grizzled man peered out, shotgun in hand. Recognition flashed in his eyes when he saw Ethan. "Took you long enough," the man grunted. His name was Caleb, a relic of another life. Someone Ethan had helped once, years ago, before everything went to hell. Now he was returning the favor. Inside, the boathouse was cluttered but functional. Radios, old computers, maps taped to the walls. Caleb locked the door behind them and turned to Ethan with a grim nod. "You're bringing a hell of a storm down. On yourself, kid," Ethan shrugged, weary. "Nothing new." Caleb glanced at Emma, then back at Ethan. "You trust her?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "With my life." Caleb grunted, clearly not convinced, but he didn't argue. "Then we better get to work." They crowded around a battered table where Caleb spread out maps and plans. "You need a broadcast, a big one, something they can't bury or spin." Emma leaned over the table, heart racing. "How?" Caleb pointed to a nearby laptop, patched into a pirate broadcast station that still worked. "Barely. We beam your evidence. Do every major news network at once. Bury them in it. Make it impossible to silence." It was risky. If they were found before the upload finished, everything would be lost. But it was their best shot. They worked through the night, preparing the files, setting up backups. Emma found herself drawn deeper into the plan, fueled by a mix of terror and hope. Ethan was a different man now, focused, determined, fueled by something stronger than fear. And somehow, impossibly, she realized she was too. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. As dawn painted the sky in muted grays, Caleb finished the last connection. "You've got one window," he said. "One shot. After that, they'll trace the signal back here in minutes." Emma swallowed hard. "How long do we need to hold them off?" Caleb's mouth twisted grimly. 3 minutes, maybe less. Ethan met her gaze. Across the room, his eyes were steady. "We can do this," he said. They set the plan in motion at exactly 6 a.m., when the city's pulse was at its quietest. Emma's fingers trembled as she hit the first command. Files began uploading, lines of code flashing across the screen. Somewhere far away, the first alarms would already be sounding. Somewhere far away, powerful men were waking up to their worst nightmare and heading straight for them. The first SUV roared into view just as the upload hit 20%. Caleb swore and grabbed his shotgun, slamming the door shut. "They're early," he snarled. Ethan moved quickly, barricading the windows. With whatever they could find, Emma stayed at the laptop, her heart slamming against her ribs with every second that ticked by. 25%. 30. Gunfire ripped through the boathouse, splinters flying. Emma screamed and ducked, shielding the laptop with her body. Ethan yanked her away, pulling her into a corner behind a stack of crates. "Protect the drive!" Caleb roared, firing back through the broken door. Chaos erupted. The walls shook, the air filled with smoke and dust and the sharp metallic taste of fear. 40%. 50. Emma clutched the small hard drive like it was her own heart. "Almost there," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her, eyes sharp, body coiled like a spring. "Stay with me," he said, his voice raw. "Whatever happens, stay." "With me?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her hands didn't shake anymore. She was past fear now. She was in the fight. The attackers breached the side door, shouting commands. Caleb took 2 down before they reached him, but a third struck him hard, knocking him to the ground. "Run!" Caleb gasped, blood on his lips. Ethan grabbed Emma's hand, dragging her toward the back exit. The laptop beeped frantically, upload complete flashing across the screen in bright green letters. Hope ignited like a flare inside her. They had done it. They had exposed the truth, but survival was still uncertain. They burst through the back of the boathouse into the rising dawn, running flat out toward the docks. Behind them, the building burned, sirens wailing in the distance. Gunfire cracked in the air. Emma didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Ahead, a small boat bobbed on the water, engine idling. Caleb's backup plan. Ethan shoved Emma into the boat and leapt in after, her untying the ropes with frantic hands. Bullets punched into the water around them, but somehow, miraculously, they pulled away from the dock, the boat's engine roaring to life. The city receded behind them, swallowed by smoke and chaos. Emma collapsed onto the floor of the boat, gasping for air, her entire body trembling. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "We made it," he whispered against her hair. Emma clung to him, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We made it," she echoed. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future wasn't a death sentence. It was a promise, and they were alive to claim it. The boat cut through the grey morning mist, the river stretching endlessly ahead. Emma leaned against Ethan, exhaustion pulling at every fibre of her body, but her heart thrummed with something close to wonder. They had survived. Against all odds, against every force that tried to crush them, they were still here. And yet, survival brought its own new, terrifying questions. Ethan steered the boat toward a cluster of small, abandoned docks hidden beneath. A crumbling bridge. It was a place forgotten by the city, a perfect place to disappear. They tied the boat off and slipped into the labyrinth of underpasses and hidden pathways, moving slowly now, no longer chased, but still not safe. Safety, Emma realized, might be something they would never truly have again. They found temporary shelter in an old storage shed tucked beneath the bridge. The walls leaked, the roof sagged, but it was dry and hidden. They collapsed onto a pile of abandoned tarps, too exhausted to speak at first. Emma curled into Ethan's side, seeking warmth, seeking reassurance that he was really there. He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. For a long time they said nothing. The only sounds were the distant groan of the river and the faint hum of traffic overhead. Emma closed her eyes, breathing him in, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. It was reckless, dangerous, selfish even, but she didn't care. She was tired of fear dictating her every move. For once, she wanted to choose something for herself. "You should leave me," Ethan said finally, his voice breaking the fragile silence. Emma opened her eyes, stunned. "What?" she whispered. He pulled away slightly, looking down at her with haunted eyes. "You've done enough. You risked everything. I don't deserve more of your life." His words cut deeper than any knife. Emma sat up, fists clenching. "You don't get to decide that." Ethan looked away, pain carved into every line of his face. "I'm not good for you," he said. "My life is—" He trailed off, helpless. Emma reached out, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You're not your past," she said fiercely. "You're not what they tried to make you. You're you, and I choose you." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't back down. Tears glistened in Ethan's eyes, but he blinked them away. "I don't know how to be enough for someone like you," he said hoarsely. Emma smiled sadly. "You already are." She leaned in then, bridging the final gap between them, pressing her forehead against his. Their breath mingled, shaky and uncertain. The moment stretched out, delicate and trembling. "I love you," Emma whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Ethan froze, his entire body going still. For a heartbeat she feared she had broken everything. But then slowly, achingly, he cupped her face in his rough hands. "Emma," he breathed, like a prayer, like a curse. And then he kissed her desperately, like a drowning man clinging to the only thing keeping him afloat. The kiss shattered something inside her, a dam of fear, of doubt, of pain. It wasn't perfect, it was messy and raw, but it was real. It was theirs. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "I love you too," he said. "God help me. I love you." Emma laughed through her tears, clutching his jacket like she might never let go again. They stayed, like that for a long time, holding each other, anchoring themselves in the only certainty they had left, each other. Eventually, Ethan pulled back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We need a plan," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Emma nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "Together," she said, "whatever it takes." They spent the afternoon planning their next moves carefully. They would need new identities, a way to leave the city without leaving a trail. Caleb had contacts Ethan trusted, real ones this time. If they could reach them, if they could vanish completely, maybe, just maybe, they could start over somewhere. No one knew their names. Somewhere they could be free. As night fell, they sat side by side under the broken roof, watching the stars flicker to life above the dirty skyline. Emma rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. It wasn't over. The world would keep chasing them. The past wouldn't just vanish. But here, in this stolen moment, they had something stronger than fear. They had hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to build a whole new life. The rain came without warning, sheets of water pouring from the sky as if the heavens themselves were breaking apart. Emma and Ethan huddled beneath a broken awning near the riverbank, the sound of the storm drowning out the city's usual roar. Drops slid down Ethan's face, tracing the scars of battles past, making him look almost ethereal. Emma couldn't tear her eyes away. "We could leave tonight," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Caleb's contacts have papers. Ready? New names, new lives." Emma swallowed hard, the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest. To vanish would mean safety, anonymity, a chance to build something real. But it would also mean abandoning everything, the truth, the fight, the justice they had risked everything for. Ethan must have seen the turmoil on her face, because he reached out, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll follow you," he said simply. "Whatever you decide." Emma closed her eyes against the rush of emotion. How could she choose? How could she be sure what was right anymore, when the world seemed to twist right and wrong into something unrecognizable? Thunder cracked overhead, and for a moment, the world was pure sound and fury. Emma pressed her forehead against Ethan's chest, feeling the steady drumbeat of his heart against her skin. She thought about the girl she had been months ago, the one who followed rules, who avoided risks, who believed safety was enough. That girl was gone, and in her place stood someone stronger. "I don't want to hide," she whispered finally, the words trembling out of her. Ethan stiffened slightly, his arms tightening around her. "You don't have to," he said, "but if you stay, it won't be easy." Emma laughed wetly against his jacket. "Since when has anything about us been easy?" Ethan chuckled too, the sound raw and real. "Fair point." They pulled back just enough to see each other's faces, rainwater streaking between them. "Then we—" "Stay," Ethan said, searching her eyes for doubt. Emma nodded, fierce and certain now. "We stay, we fight, we finish what we started." Lightning lit up the sky, and for a heartbeat she saw the future blazing ahead of them. Not easy, not safe, but real. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "I don't deserve you," he said, voice breaking. Emma smiled, tears mixing with the rain. "None of us deserves anything good. That's why we fight for it." Ethan kissed her then, hard and desperate, pouring all his fear, his hope, his broken dreams into the space between them. Emma kissed him back, matching his intensity, claiming him just as fiercely. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Together," he said. "Always," she replied. It wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't a promise of happy endings, but it was real. And sometimes real was the most powerful kind of magic. They stood there, clinging to each other in the storm, two souls refusing to be washed away. They made their way back to the boathouse ruins, soaked to the bone, but filled with a kind of reckless determination. Caleb's old radio equipment was still there, battered but functional. Together they crafted a message, short, raw, undeniable. They didn't hide their faces, they didn't blur the truth. They put it all out there for the world to see. Within hours, the video went viral, spreading like wildfire across every corner of the internet. News anchors debated it, officials scrambled to deny it, protests erupted in cities across the country. The empire that had hunted Ethan for so long began to crumble, piece by piece, under the weight of exposure. The storm they had unleashed was unstoppable now. But so was the danger. Their faces were everywhere, their names whispered in fear and fury. Staying meant more risks, more enemies, more nights looking over their shoulders. But it also meant purpose. It meant refusing to be erased. It meant reclaiming their lives from the hands of those who tried to destroy them. One night, weeks later, as the city buzzed with change and chaos, Ethan and Emma stood on the rooftop of a crumbling building, watching the world they had shaken. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. Emma smiled, leaning into him. "No," she said. "We're just getting started." The rain returned then, soft and steady this time, washing over them like a benediction, and for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel afraid. She felt free. Weeks turned into months. The city changed slowly, grudgingly, like an old beast forced into submission. The protests had not vanished, but the noise had lessened into a low, constant hum. The powerful men who once ruled from the shadows now faced investigations, trials, and public disgrace. It wasn't complete justice, not yet, but it was a start, a crack in a once impenetrable wall. Emma and Ethan moved carefully through this new world they had helped create. They still lived in the shadows, changing addresses, staying ahead of the few who refused to let the past die, but there was less fear now, more days where they could walk down the street and not wonder if it would be their last. More mornings where the first thought wasn't survival but possibility. They rented a small apartment above a second-hand bookstore, a place that smelled of old paper and sunlight. The landlord was an old woman who asked no questions, just smiled with a knowing glint in her eye. Emma loved it immediately. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Every crack in the walls, every creaky floorboard was a testament to survival. Ethan spent his days fixing up the apartment, building shelves, mending broken things with hands that finally had a future to work for. Emma returned to teaching, First small volunteer classes at a shelter, then, slowly, more formal programs. Children with eyes too old for their years clung to her stories, to her unwavering belief that even broken beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. At night, they sat together by the window, watching the stars crawl across the sky. Sometimes, they talked about what they had lost, what they had almost lost. More often, they talked about dreams, small ones at first, a bigger bookshelf, a garden on the roof, then bigger ones, a real school maybe, or a foundation to help others who had been swallowed by the system. They never pretended the scars. They weren't there. Some nights, Ethan woke gasping from nightmares, the ghosts of the past clawing at his mind. Emma held him through it, whispering until the tremors faded. Some days, Emma struggled with guilt. Survivor's guilt, the fear that one wrong step would bring it all crashing down again, but they carried each other through it all. One evening, after a long day of painting the living room walls a cheerful, stubborn yellow, Ethan pulled Emma onto the couch, both of them streaked with paint and laughter. He held out a small box, worn at the edges, like he had carried it a long time. Emma stared at it, heart pounding. "Open it," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Inside was a simple silver ring, unadorned, unpretentious. Emma looked up, tears blurring her vision. Ethan was smiling at her, that rare, unguarded smile that still made her knees weak. "It's not about promises," he said quietly. "It's not about guarantees. It's just me asking if you'll keep choosing me. Every day." Emma laughed through. Her tears, the sound rich and alive. She slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from overwhelming love. "Always," she whispered, "every damn day." Ethan pulled her into a fierce, crushing hug, and for a long time neither of them let go. They didn't need vows or ceremonies. They didn't need witnesses. They had already built something stronger than any piece of paper. Later, as they lay tangled together on the couch, listening to the city breathe around them, Emma whispered, "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" Ethan kissed the crown of her head. "Maybe, maybe not." He chuckled softly. "But as long as I'm running with you, I don't mind." She smiled against his chest, feeling safer than she ever had before. Spring arrived early that year, scattering wildflowers through the cracks in the pavement. Emma planted herbs in chipped pots on the windowsill, stubborn little things that thrived against the odds. Ethan built her a tiny bookshelf by the bed, and she filled it with second-hand books that smelled of 1,000 forgotten dreams. Their life was imperfect, messy, and heartbreakingly real. One afternoon, as Emma read to a circle of children in the park, she caught Ethan watching her from a distance. He leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed, a small smile tugging at his lips. Their eyes met, and the whole world seemed to narrow down to that single moment. Two people who had risked everything, lost almost everything, and still found each other. She waved at him, and he waved back, and somehow it was more intimate, more powerful than any kiss. A silent promise renewed, a life reclaimed. A story still being written. A stranger's promise, once made in desperation, had become something far more extraordinary, a promise kept. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching. From. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.